In those days Mattathias, son of John, son of Simeon, a priest in the line of 𝗕𝗏, had left Jerusalem to make his home in the town of Modane. He had 5 sons: John, who was known as Gaddi; Simon, who was called 𝗕ci; Judas, who was called Maccabeus; Eleazar, who was called 𝗤𝗏, and Jonathan, who was called Apphus. When Mattathias saw the sacrilegious acts done in Judea and Jerusalem, he said, "How terrible that I was born to see this, the destruction of my people, the ruin of the holy city. How terrible to stand by while Jerusalem is given to enemies, while the sanctuary is handed over to foreigners. Her temple is like a man who has lost his honor. The glorious vessels have been carried into exile. Her infants have been murdered in the streets, and her young men have been killed by the enemy's sword. What nation has not taken its share of her realm? What nation has not plundered her? All her ornaments have been taken away. No longer free, she has become a slave. Look at our sanctuary and see how our beauty and our glory are laid waste. They have been defiled by the Gentiles. What is left to live for?" To show their grief, Mattathias and his sons tore their clothing, dressed themselves in sackcloth, and mourned deeply. Officers of the king arrived in Modane to force the people to abandon Judaism and to offer pagan sacrifices. Many of the Israelites went along with these men, but Mattathias and his sons refused to go near the pagan altar. In response, the king's officers said to Mattathias, "You are an honored leader and an important man in this town. Your sons and brothers follow you. Therefore, be the first in your town to obey the king's command, just as all the Gentiles and the people of Judea and those living in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons will be counted among the king's favored leaders and be made rich with gold, silver, and many gifts." But Mattathias loudly replied, "Even if every nation in the kingdom obeys the king, yielding to his decrees and forsaking their own ancestral religion, I and my sons and my brothers will still follow the covenant of our ancestors. Heaven forbid that we should abandon the law of Moses and the commandments. We will never obey the orders of the king, nor will we stray from our religion, either to the right or to the left." As he finished speaking, a certain Jew came forward to offer sacrifices on the pagan altar in the town of Modane, according to the king's regulations. When Mattathias saw this, he burned with passion. Then, driven by righteous fury, he ran at the man and slaughtered him on the altar. At the same time, he killed the officer the king had sent to enforce the pagan sacrifices, and he pulled down the altar. In his zeal for the law of Moses, he showed the spirit Phinehas had shown against Zimri son of Salu. Mattathias then went through the town, shouting loudly, "Everyone who is zealous for the law of Moses and wants to obey the covenant, follow me." Then he and his sons escaped into the hills, leaving behind everything they owned. Many who were committed to righteousness and justice retreated into the wilderness and lived there with their children, their wives, and their livestock because their troubles had become so difficult to bear. The king's officers and soldiers in Jerusalem, in the city of David, heard about these Jews who had defied the king's commands and gone into hiding in the wilderness. Soldiers were sent after them, and when they found them, they set up camp across from them and prepared to attack them on the Sabbath. But first the soldiers said to them, "Enough of this. Come forward and obey the king's command, and you will live." But the Jews replied, "We will not come forward. nor will we desecrate the Sabbath by obeying the king's orders." Without hesitation, the soldiers attacked, but the Jews offered no resistance, refusing to throw stones at them or even to barricade their hideouts. They said, "Let us all die in innocence. Heaven and earth will witness to the fact that you are killing us unjustly." So the foreigners attacked them on the Sabbath, and they were killed, together with their wives, children, and their livestock. 1,000 people died that day. When Mattathias and his friends heard this news, they mourned deeply. They said to one another, "If we all do as our fellow Israelites have done and refuse to fight the Gentiles for our lives and beliefs, they will quickly wipe us off the face of the earth." So that day they decided, "If anyone attacks us on the Sabbath day, we will fight them. We will not die in our hiding places as our fellow Israelites did." They were joined at that time by a group of Hasmoneans, strong Israelite warriors who were deeply committed to the law of Moses. And all those who fled from persecution joined them, giving them added support. They formed an organized army and in their anger killed guilty and ungodly Jews. The survivors fled to the Gentiles for safety. Mattathias and his friends went around and tore down the pagan altars. And they forcibly circumcised any boys in the hill country of Israel who had not been circumcised. They hunted down the arrogant and were successful in their fight. They rescued the law of Moses from the control of the Gentiles and their kings, and they never gave in to those who were guilty. As the time of Mattathias's death drew near, he said to his sons, "Pride and scorn have become rampant. It is a time of violence and fury. Therefore, my sons, be zealous for the law of Moses and give your lives for the covenant of your ancestors. If you remember the deeds our ancestors did for each of their generations, you will receive great honor and everlasting fame." Wasn't Abraham found faithful when he was tested? And wasn't he declared to be righteous? Joseph kept the law through trying times, and he became master over Egypt. As a reward for his zeal, our ancestor Phinehas was granted a covenant that his descendants would be priests for all time. For fulfilling his duty, Joshua became a judge in Israel. For giving a positive report to the people, Caleb received an inheritance in the land. For showing mercy, David received the promise that his descendants would rule for all time. Because of his zeal for the law of Moses, Elijah was taken up into heaven. Because they had faith, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael were rescued from the flames. Because he was innocent, Daniel was delivered from the lion's jaws. Take notice how, in every generation, all who trust in God are strong. Do not fear the threats of sinners, for their glory will turn to dung and worms. Today they are exalted, but tomorrow they cannot be found. Because they will return to dust, and their planning will come to nothing. Therefore, my sons, be courageous and strong in keeping the law of Moses, for by obeying it you will gain glory. Your brother Simon is a wise man, so listen to him always, for he will take my place. Let Judas Maccabeus, who has always been valiant and strong, be the leader of your army and direct the war against the Gentiles. Gather together all who observe the law of Moses, and avenge the wrong of your people. Pay back the Gentiles in full, and always obey the law of Moses." Mattathias blessed his sons, and then he died. He was buried in the tomb of his ancestors in Modane, and all Israel mourned deeply for him.